So, welcome to the Keen on Yoga podcast. Today's guest is a long-awaited one for me. It's Peter A. Levine. He's been a hero of mine since I read his book, Waking the Tiger, Healing Trauma. I must have read that when I was about 20 years old. Just a fantastic book, had a big influence on me as someone who was always quite anxious and suffered on the mental health level, to be frank. And more recently, I read his autobiography of trauma, A Healing Journey. So that's his personal story, which we'll talk about later. A fantastic read. And thanks, Peter. And you hold doctorates in biophysics and psychology, and he's the founder of Somatic Experiencing and runs courses and trainings worldwide. And has received numerous awards. We don't need to go further into his credentials. I think he's a legend now and speaks for himself. So, Peter, thank you for being on the show.
All right. Yeah, well, good to meet you. Good to meet you. By the way, just to say to the viewers, I had an eye surgery a couple of days ago, so I'm supposed to use these glasses when I use the computer. So it's not that I'm a rock star.
It does look like that with the pink shades. If you can't see, he's got some really kind of funky, kind of 70s style shades there. So let's crack on. I know, time is of the essence, and I've got a few questions to get through, having stored them up for many years.
Sure.
First of all, to kick off, the most obvious thing is the metaphor of the tiger in Waking the Tiger. And I think that really kind of is a good segue into what somatic experiencing is really. So I know you've said it a million times. I know you spoke about all of the stuff, but please humor our audience one more time and just go through that little story that of treating a patient and how you came to this idea.
Yeah. Well, I was asked to see this woman who I call Nancy, and she was referred to a psychiatrist, and she had all kinds of physical symptoms, what we would now call fibromyalgia, irritable bowel syndrome, and so forth, migraines, severe PMS, and but she also suffered from extreme panic attacks and agoraphobia, to the degree that she couldn't leave the house without her husband, and even with her husband, it was an ordeal. And so my friend, she was referred to my friend, my psychiatrist friend, and he prescribed a couple of medications for the anxiety, but it had a negligible effect. So I had been developing some mind-body approaches to healing, to reducing stress, working with a group of men who had high blood pressure. And I found working with certain muscles, particularly around the head, neck, shoulders, that sometimes the blood pressure would drop like 10, they would start at 160, it would go down to 150, sometimes even 140, even to 120 normal range. And so he thought that maybe some of those relaxation exercises would be helpful. Well, I was mistaken. So I'll tell you the story of what happened back in, I think it was 1969. So she came in and she was holding onto her husband's arm and grabbing onto his arm. Obviously, she was in acute fear and tremendous anxiety. So I tried to reassure her that we would just do some exercises on relaxation exercises to help with her anxiety. And her eyes were like wide open, like the deer in the headlights, and I could see from her carotid pulse that her heart rate was about 130 beats a minute. And so anyhow, I started to have her relax those muscles, and her heart rate went down and down, and I was quite relieved. I had figured, okay, now I've mastered my technique, but then it shot way up. It just rebounded to a very high level, to about 140 beats a minute. 150 beats a minute even. And I remember, well, if you could think of what would be the stupidest thing to say under these circumstances, that's exactly what I had said. Nancy, relax, you need to relax, you need to relax. Okay. And her heart rate started going down again, and down to like 100, 90, 80, 70, 60, 55. And she opened her eyes and grabbed onto mine and said her words, "Doctor, help me, I'm dying. Don't let me die, help me." And in that moment of fear on my part, like, my God, what am I going to do? This image came, like a waking image, like a waking dream image of a tiger crouching at the far end of the consultation room, getting ready to spring. And without quite knowing why this happened at the time, I did understand it, of course, later. I said, "Nancy, there's a tiger. There's a tiger chasing you. Run, climb those rocks and escape." And now you can see where the title, Waking the Tiger, comes from. But let's go on with the story. So anyhow, she, when she started to try to run, and I could see it because her legs became even more became frozen. And I said, "Nancy, here's my hand," virtually, of course, and let's just see if we can move a little bit together. And then after that, she started to, her body started to tremble, to shake. There would be deep, spontaneous breaths. Her finger colors would turn from blue to nice, rose colored. Her face also would become more colored. It was kind of almost white gray before. And this went on for another 30 or 40 minutes. And I just basically stayed there with her. So at the end of the session, she opened her eyes, and instead of grabbing onto my eyes, she gently looked towards me as I looked towards her. This would later be called the social engagement system by my dear friend Stephen Porges. And she asked if I wanted to know what happened. And of course I know what happened. This is my method. Obviously I didn't. So I asked her, I said, "Yes, please. Tell me what you experienced." She said, "Well, when you first told me about the image of the tiger, I could actually see it also. And when you said to run, I tried to run, but my legs were like lead, like being in quicksand. But when you offered your hand, I could start to move." And this is important because you have to be present with the other. It's not just a technique. It's a certain presence that one has to bring. I think you can understand that as a yoga teacher, right? And so she said, then I could feel my legs starting to run. At first, they were barely able to move, but then the power started coming in. And I could feel myself running, and I could feel my whole body climbing up the rock wall and sitting on the ledge above and looking down, because I knew I was safe. I knew that I was safe. And I looked down and I saw the tiger, and I wasn't scared. I wasn't terrified. And then the image of the tiger disappeared, and in its place, I saw an image of myself when I was 4 years old, so that was 20 years ago, where she was being held down by doctors and nurses and an ether mask was forced on her face for a routine tonsillectomy. And her body had tried to run and escape for 20 years, but she was unable to do that because she was held down. And her body continued to be held down. And so that was an important insight, because it's not reliving the trauma. It's by finding out what should have happened but didn't happen, but now can happen. And there was another thing that she reported. And at first, I really didn't get it, but now I really get it, because I'm in the process of working on a book called Spirituality and Trauma. that she said that she felt like she was being held in warm, tingling waves. And such an ordinary experience, both at the same time ordinary and extraordinary, I believe is the basis of many types of spiritual experiences. Further, that there's an intrinsic and welded unity between trauma and spirituality. So that really, that was after that session. I was going to be a scientist, and I was going to say I was going to be an astronaut scientist. I actually got to work with NASA on a project of managing stress in the astronauts, but that's a whole other story. But anyhow, this was really, to me, a revelation, and I knew that my career and my life was changed irrevocably. And so I started to try to put this together as a method so I could teach it to people. And I had about a dozen or 15 people from Berkeley. They would come to my house every other week. They call it my tree house. It was in Wildcat Canyon. And I would work with somebody and then try to explain why I was doing what I was doing and so forth. And it took a while, but I started to be able to begin to teach this as a method, which became known as somatic experiencing.
I think what strikes me so clearly about that method was the idea of the animal having a natural trauma response, for people that don't know this work. And Peter, at least at the time, your understanding in that book was that the trauma response for the adult hasn't been fully gone through. So where the animal, the zebra, escapes his prey and
That's right.
First of all freezes if the prey has it, freezes, and then the prey maybe releases it, whatever, thinks it's dead, releases it, and then it shakes, and it goes through these responses, and naturally gets out the trauma.
Yeah.
That we haven't done that, so we're stuck. And I'm just going to say one more thing, that you go in the book, you very nicely detail that there's a sense of constriction, a disassociation, a helplessness, and then a freezing. So you kind of go through stages of it.
That's correct.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
correct. So initial response is to try to flee or to fight. So if clearly this is a larger predator, we're going to try to flee. And that's again what Nancy's body was trying to do. Now, and I have different videos of this that shows really clearly how animals don't get traumatized. There's one video that I frequently use in my teaching, and it's of a cheetah, predator, and impala, prey. And the impala are grazing on an uplands meadow in the Serengeti without any kind of anxiety, apparent anxiety. And then what comes in very stealthily is this cheetah, and the cheetah bursts forth, and then the impala runs to escape, and this goes on at 65 miles an hour, 105 kilometers an hour. Tremendous amount of energy that's engaged in both, because it's survival for both. Because if the cheetah is unable to make a kill in 6 tries, that her cubs will starve and that she will starve and the species will become extinct. So there's a neutrality that nature has. But what was most interesting is that in this video, you'll see, because the cheetah is the fastest land mammal, and but it can only sustain this surge of energy for about 20 seconds, at most a half a minute. So at the end, the cheetah is spent, and she's chewing on the gazelle. The gazelle looks, the impala looks, all purposes, to be dead, because she's just chewing on it. And what then happens is oh gosh, what are they called? these other prey,
Hyena?
hyena, the
Yeah.
spotted,
Okay.
then sees an opportunity and goes, and then uh, then he starts chewing on the animal, and then the cheetah comes back into the picture, and then the hyena goes back, and they're doing a face-off with each other, and in that moment, the impala turns over, jumps over, and then runs to live another day. But what happens, and I've observed this with many animals, is that they have a shaking and trembling that's then funneled into deep spontaneous breaths and escape responses. So I asked myself the question, why don't animals get traumatized? Well, that became clear because they do very similar things that Nancy did, but without anybody's help. That was an important insight. At the same time, they may shake and tremble, and then again have deep, spontaneous, easy, spontaneous breaths. And but the question is, why do we prevent ourselves from coming through the trauma? Why do we carry it with us when wild animals in their natural environment, they don't do that. They don't need to. They do it automatically. And so I studied ethology, which is the study of observing animals, wild animals in their natural environment, and interviewed a number of wildlife managers, and actually got considerable support from a Nobel Prize winner in ethology in 1972, 73. I think it's 72, Nicholas Tingbergen. And when I explained to him my observations, he was very supportive. And so I dedicate, in my autobiography, he's one of the people I dedicate the book to. So that was really kind of the wrap of my whole story. And yeah.
Well, I remember you saying in one of your books how you'd been hit by a car at one point, and
Oh,
you
yeah.
went through, yeah, and you were in the ambulance, and you were going through purposefully your trauma response and kind of shaking, and then I think the nurses said, "Well, you don't seem, that traumatized," and you said, "I've kind of done it myself. I've used that medicine on
Yeah.
myself to
Not
kind of."
just by myself.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
not just by myself. And yes, this is a vignette, a beginning of another one of my books
Mm.
called In an Unspoken Voice, How the Body Releases Trauma and Restores Goodness. And I was walking to the restaurant. I was going to have my lunch at one of my favorite restaurants. And I was going to go that afternoon to my friend Butch's 70th birthday. And then this teenager didn't see me because there was a truck parked there, and went and hit me in the crosswalk and threw me onto the windshield, and then up into the air and back onto the ground. And there I lay, and a group of onlookers came around me, and they were looking down like a pack of ravenous birds looking at me, their prey, which was me. And this man came over, and he kind of shouted at me. He said, "I'm a paramedic, an off-duty paramedic. Don't move." And that even terrified me more. He said, "Don't move because you may have broken your neck." And in that moment, it's like I dislocated. I dislocated from my body. It's like I left my body, and I was up there in the air looking down. It's called association, and see myself with these people, and laying and feeling sorry in a way for that young man that was laying on the ground. Thankfully, after a few minutes, another person came by, a woman, and she knelt by my side and she asked me, I'm a doctor. I'm a pediatrician, actually. Is there anything I can do to help? And I said, yes, please stay with me. I call that section in the book The Power of Kindness, because she sat down and she took my hand in hers. And having her presence, that allowed me to use the techniques I had been developing over the past 50 years in somatic experiencing. But it was really also necessary to have that present empathetic other. Another thing I write in an unspoken voice is trauma is not just what happens to us, or so much just what happens to us, but it's rather what we hold inside in the absence of an empathetic, present empathetic other. And the pediatrician was that for me. So even though I knew what to do, and when I was put in the ambulance, they take your pulse and blood pressure, of course. And I asked the paramedic, I said, can you give me my readings? And she said, I'm sorry, I can only give that to a doctor. And I said, well, half truth. I said, I am a doctor. I didn't say what kind, say a doctorate. And she said, well, something must be wrong with the monitor. Let me reset it. Same thing. And she said, well, we have another backup. And she tried it. And again, my blood pressure and my pulse rate were normal, 64 and 120 over 70. And she said, I don't understand that. How is it possible that you're not exhibiting a trauma response? And I explained it to her. I never miss an opportunity to proselytize. So I'm talking with you and proselytizing. And she said, well, that's really interesting because last week we had somebody come in and they were telling us to relive our traumatic experiences, to drain the swamp, so to speak. And it just made things worse. And now I see that it's a physiological thing, that the body needs to reset itself. I said, yes, that's exactly right. You have it. You have it. So,
I think that's the thing is that, yeah, that so often it's confused like you should go back into the trauma. And I don't think that's exactly what you're saying quite oftentimes. I mean, you say trauma is a disorder in presence, which I really like. And there's a quality of presentness as well in the whole experiencing at the time, that you're not kind of going back. I mean, it's really my problem with a lot of the treatment that I had which was primarily talk therapy, was going back into the past, and it seemed to make things worse. It was only kind of almost crystallizing the experiences that were already there. So yeah, how would you kind of relate the past to the present in your mode of working?
this country singer said, Michael Murphy, there ain't no future in the past. And if we keep going back to the past, that's what will circulate the past. Because then there won't be a future. And that's what trauma is, when you're stuck in the past without the possibility of a future. And so, again, when I wrote Waking the Tiger, Eugene Gendlin, the developer of focusing, we became good friends after this. And he said, this book, Peter Levine's book, is that the healing of trauma comes not from rehashing it, but by helping the person recapture what kind of a response they were unable to execute at the time. And I thought, well, that says it right precisely. Because again, I mean, that's really what this is about. It's about how we can untangle from the past and move into a future free of, or not dominated by the past. In the autobiography of trauma, I was starting to have some strange symptoms, probably a little bit like what Nancy was having. And so I asked one of my students to sit with me and to be my guide. And she offered. And so as we started to work with these images that were coming up, she did a good job in redirecting me to an event which happened on my 4th birthday. And in my birthday, or for my birthday, my parents must have come in late at night or early in the morning, and underneath my bed, they'd laid tracks for a model train out into the room and then back underneath the bed. And when I woke, I saw the train, I heard the train, and I literally jumped out of bed and ran over to the transformer to control the speed. I think, my parents saw me, at the store we were passing, and I saw a model train, and they could tell that my eyes were glued to the train. So anyhow, in that time, even though I experienced severe trauma really throughout my life, that I knew in that moment that I was cared for, that I was loved. And my guide helped me really sense that in my body, embody it. And by doing that, I was then able to go to a memory when I was about 12 years old. And it's a long story, but my parents, their life was threatened by the mafia, and particularly by this man named Johnny Dioguardo. And he was one of the worst mafia. He's featured in the 2 movies, The Goodfellas and the Irishman. And when you wanted to really put terror into your adversary, he was the person that you enlist. And so he basically told my father, if you testify against me, you will find your family face down in the East River. So anyhow, this went on for many years. There was it really eroded my self-confidence. It was like trauma pulls our legs from under us. But there was a park, Reservoir Oval Park, right across the street, the road from our house, from our tenement. And, I would go home from school, middle school, and then get my milk and cookies, and then go across the road, climb this wrought iron fence, and go down through these bushes, because there was a cinder oval running track. That's where it got the name Reservoir Oval. And as I started to move, like with Nancy, my legs, I started to become more strong, and I could continue running, and then my breath would become more spontaneous. But then one day, when I climbed over the fence, and I could see there was a group of thugs, gang members. They were smoking cigarettes and had these motorcycle hats like that Marlon Brando wore, and leather jackets, black leather jackets. And I realized that I was in danger. And again, it wasn't a thought thing. It wasn't a cognitive thing. My body knew it. The hairs on the back of my neck and my back stood up. I felt chills. And I realized if I tried to climb up the fence to get over to the other side, they would probably catch me. So I ran into the bushes, and they went after me and threw me to the ground and violently assaulted and raped me. But we didn't go to that memory right away. We were able to switch back and forth between that memory, the embodiment of that memory, where I got the train set as a 4-year-old, And in somatic experience, like I was saying, we don't take people into the traumas. We find ways to
I think you mentioned it in one of your book. Yeah, a Medusa, and working with trauma's reflection, which I
yeah,
liked. But you don't actually go straight on, but you somehow kind of touch it, but with a light kind of touch. Is that right?
yeah, absolute. I think that's in Waking the Tiger. Excuse me. And yeah, you know, in the myth of Medusa. By the way, I've been deeply informed by dreams and mythology, and in this case, she was the one who had all these snakes on her head. I mean, she was one nasty gal, and and she was causing havoc because everybody that looked at her, because she was so compelling, they would become stone. And if you ever go to Athens and you see all these statues, well, they used to be people until they looked in Medusa's eyes. I made that up, of course. And so Perseus, who was a young man, went to try to neutralize her, as they say, to kill her. But he sought counsel from Athena, who was the goddess of wisdom and knowledge and wisdom. And he sought her counsel. And she said to him, "Whatever you do, Perseus, do not look into her eyes. Do not look directly at her." But then he thought, well, later on, again, I made this part up. He's thinking, well, how do I do that? You know, and then he realized, because, the warriors wear a sword, a shield, I mean, and a sword. And he was using the shield to see her reflection. And while he did that, he was then able to cut off her head. So it was in trauma's reflection, not directly at trauma, but its reflection. But in mythology, usually something like that is like Act 1. The next act was out of the wound emerged two entities. One was Perseus, who was the winged horse, and the other was Creosaur, who was the warrior with the golden sword. And they both had these deep meanings, for me at least. Because when Perseus was able to slay her, the winged horse in dreams, often in mythology, the horse is about instinct, and the wings are about being able to fly, about freedom. So freedom connecting with our instincts. And Creosaur, who is a warrior, the warrior with the golden sword, the golden sword, again, my understanding is it's about truth, about ultimate truth. And again, this is about the instinct to heal and coming together with this deep embodied truth, embodied the instinct of the mythological image of the horse.
And I know you're very keen on intuition as part of this, and also, yeah, intuition related also to kind of dreams or waking dreams that you talk about as well in your more recent book. I, I, I kind of wonder how we go into intuition without constantly reliving the trauma to try and get over it. Because I kind of sense that in my own life, that you almost kind of put yourself back into similar states to try and get over it intuitively, but then you get kind of floored at the same hurdle again and again. And how to use one of your other terms against you, how do we defang our trauma without getting bitten by it?
I don't think that's intuitive. I think that's more of
Okay, compulsion, right?
yeah, it's more of a compulsion.
Mm.
Yeah, we have to have that guidance who helps us become present enough in our own bodies that we can deal with these things, like with Perseus's shield. not looking directly into the trauma, eye to eye of the trauma. So, but intuition, again, is something that is very powerful. Well, one of the things, actually, one of the important experiences I had of intuition was in developing my work, is in contacting a mythological figure, Albert Einstein. And
You've got to
when
tell the story of the bread, the crispy bread and soup. Go on, tell that.
yeah,
Yeah, I love that one.
anyhow, when I was developing somatic experiencing and trying to teach it, and also working on my dissertation, my doctoral dissertation, which was on stress. At the end, I was also teaching a class called Contemporary Natural Sciences to help kind of pay for my room and board. And I would go to my favorite restaurant, usually at least once, twice a week. And it was called the Beggar's Banquet. It was on San Pablo Avenue. Apparently it's no longer there. Actually, I did a book reading and I mentioned this, and this woman raised her hands. It looks like she was a similar age as me. And she said, yes, I went to that restaurant myself. And she described it, and she had definitely gone there. So anyhow, I'm sitting there, and they would usually start me with a warm bowl of pureed vegetable soup. And, it was along some French bread that was crispy on the outside and moist and soft on the inside. And it's like all of the events of the day would just kind of go back into the background. And I just felt nourished and cared for. I guess maybe like the experience with the train. I hadn't thought of it quite that way. And so I would be sitting there at the table, and then they would come and, ask me what I wanted to order. And, I would tell them. And while I was waiting, this figure came from the left side, and he looked at me and motioned to it was a table for 2 chairs, and motioned to that second chair, which was facing me. And so I nodded yes. And then I realized this was this old man with crazy unkept hair, and also with a sports jacket that was 3 times too big for him, for his frame. And then in a moment, I realized intuitively, I guess you could say, that this was an image of Albert Einstein. And so we would start carrying on a conversation. And I would ask him questions. And then he would ask me questions about my questions. Kind of the Socratic method of knowledge, passing on knowledge. And this went on for some time, for a better part of a year, I think. And one of the things that he gifted with me in that one of those last sessions, by the way, remember, I'm doing a doctoral dissertation. So the scientist part of me knew this wasn't really happening. I mean, he wasn't even alive. But there's a process that Carl Jung talks about called active imagination. And it's not like mental imagery. It's not like hypnosis or self-hypnosis. It's something quite different. And, but at the same time, it seems so real. But that's the nature often of this kind of active imagination. Well, one of the last sessions, as I was mentioning, I was starting to realize that trauma isn't just something that happened to a person in their lifetime, but something that seemed to be passed on from generation to generation. So I asked him about that and what he could offer. So, like in a dream within a dream, he took me to a small pond And I had a meter stick, a yardstick, and he put stones, small stones, all the way along, and had me hold it over the pond and then twist, and then all of the stones would fall at the same time. And then there would be concentric waves moving out in all directions, forward, backwards, sideways. And then he said, but what happens is if any of these two get stuck somehow, these wave fronts, then everything after that will be distorted. And I said, well, but then can you tell me how to work with this therapeutically? And he said, Peter, I'm going to leave that to you. I don't know, but I know that you know. And again, the use of my intuition, that you just would work with the person in the present, engaging with these energy fields, finding where they got stuck, and then just unsticking them in 2 or 3 or whatever places, and then the whole system would restore itself. And not only would we be getting this energy fields from our parents, but we resolving it would actually then help our parents' healing and our grandparents and our great-grandparents. Because, of course, Einstein knows that space and time are one and the same. So that was a good reason why he was the person who was my imagining mentor. But there was a bigger piece of that story. So about 40 years ago, I was visiting my parents in New York where they lived. And I had spent the day downtown going to museums and just, having a nice time eating at a restaurant. And so at the end of the day, I was coming back in the train and went up the hill and then went up to my parents' house and opened the door. And they were sitting there on the couch. And I just happened to notice there was a shelf above them, a bookshelf. And there were a number of books, and there was one book that was standing out. And it was a book by Einstein on the special theory of relativity. Okay. So anyhow, that prompted me to tell my parents about my imaginary encounters. And my mother, who could be incredibly intuitive, said, no, Peter, you didn't imagine it. It really happened. And I remember thinking, what? What do you mean? And she went on to describe that when she was 8 months pregnant with me, she and my father were canoeing on this lake in New Jersey, and this wind came and tipped over the canoe. And they tried to right the canoe to get back in, otherwise they would have perished. And they were unable to do that as much as they struggled. So then a small sailboat came near them, and they reached for my parents, pulled them on their boat, gave them towels to dry off, and brought them back to shore safely. And they introduced themselves as Albert Einstein and his stepdaughter. And my mother intuited that because he saved my life even before I was born, that I would be forever connected with him as a mentor and as a guide.
It's like a special godfather.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But what was your mother doing 8 months pregnant canoeing in the first place?
Well,
That's what's coming through my head.
There are many, many stories there, but
wow! I know I've heard. Yep. Sorry.
It was again that bonding, that attachment, that was life preserving. That also then gifted me his presence as a guide. And as I said, my mother could be tremendously intuitive. And I think that's one of the gifts that I have from her. I mean, she definitely was not a good mother. Certainly not a good enough mother. But there were gifts from both my parents that I gave, even though they were, important trauma components. So intuition is extremely important. You know,
I think the book you write, in the more recent book on your autobiography of your own healing, is incredibly candid about your parents' stories, and I encourage everyone to read that book and then work yourself backwards to Peter's books. To be honest, I mean that book is a great way, and in a way, it's a similar kind of little trope to Jung's autobiography. You've finally
yes,
come out with that, and it's a good introduction to your kind of thinking in a way, because it kind of shows where you come from, shows that you have been through an awful, not some kind of privileged person sitting in an ivory tower. Of course, you had a great university education. You've got all these, these awards, etc. But you certainly have been through your good old share of traumas, and it really made me have a whole new appreciation, I think, for your work. I wanted to just tax you on a couple of points, at a more practical level. What about the felt? You mentioned the felt sense and attunement, and pendulation, and the restoration of aggression, and trusting the arousal cycle. I wonder, just at the end, just a little, if any of those kind of comes to mind as of interest, whether you'd mention any of those for our
yeah,
audience.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, when we perceive that we're threatened, that our lives are threatened, we engage the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight autonomic nervous system. And if we escape, we escape. But if we are, like I was, attacked and immobilized, and Nancy was immobilized, we go into a state of shutdown. So we have normal arousal, hyper arousal, and then shutdown. So it's like having, in a way, the brake and the accelerator on at the same time. So we have to kind of untangle them so that we can complete the arousal cycle, which was the activation, flight response, and escape. So that's basically about working with those cycles. And again, to restore our aliveness. Somebody once, actually several people asked me, what's the goal of a somatic experiencing session? And I said, without thinking about it, to feel more alive and real. And it's, again, not about reliving the trauma. It's not about negative thoughts about the trauma. It really is about coming back into life, because these very same energies are what gives us our life force and our capacity to defend ourselves and our loved ones if we're attacked.
Hmm. Again,
So,
trauma is a disorder in presence. I like that.
yeah, that's right. It's in a very reduced capacity to
Hmm.
be in the here and now, And again, I think we all do need a guide. I mean, there's a lot of things we can do on our own, and I suggest a number of them in some of my books. But the most important thing is that we are able to complete these incomplete responses and come back into presence, into present time.
What about to pendulate? I liked that idea. Yeah.
Yeah. When we're traumatized, um, it's a profound constriction in our whole body psyche, and we do anything to avoid that. So we split away from it. But if we're guided appropriately, carefully, we can go into that contraction a little bit more. But then with every contraction, there's a slight expansion and another slight contraction and another slight expansion. And so when we're able to move through these, I call it pendulation between contraction and expansion, and able to hold them together at the same time, these two polarities, and in doing that, to unify them. And that's another thing about healing trauma. It really is about holding those polarities together.
You mentioned without tools, trauma rules.
Yeah.
What have you got? Any small exercise that you might start people off if they're kind of
Okay.
interested in somatic experiencing?
Yeah, sure. Do an exercise. Usually people feel more settled, more alive in doing it, but it can bring up, other memories or other feelings. But only if you wish to do the exercise with me. And the idea is to take a full, easy breath, and on the exhalation to make the sound v, coming from the belly, and let the breath and the sound come all the way out, and then just wait for the breath to come in, filling belly and chest, and then repeat. So the key is in allowing a full exhalation and vibrating the vu sound from the belly. It's a little bit, it's not a natural sound for, many, in many cultures. For example, in the German culture, it would more like woo, but as much as you can, woo. So I'll demonstrate it, and then you can do it with me if you want. I'll try it one more time. So, and then just rest and notice sensations, feelings, thoughts, inner images, memories, whatever comes up for you, and just to note them. You want to just say a little bit of what you notice, Adam?
Honestly, I kind of feel like often I'm quite shut down. Like I don't immediately connect to particular things. Like like I find it hard to conjure up things, and then when I shouldn't, things come up. Like, right, when pressured, I don't kind of come up with anything, and then suddenly, when I'm not meant to be feeling something, then they'll come.
Right. So that's what happens in shutdown. So
Right,
now
right.
the next part of this is a way of coming out of the shutdown. And you start the same way with the vu breath and the vu sound. And then next bring in the jaw. And it's a little bit like a animal sound, a growl. And then just continue with the opening and closing the jaw, the mouth. But only opening it to where you feel a resistance, and then letting it close, contraction, and then letting it open a little bit more, expansion, contraction, expansion. So again, I'll demonstrate. Start with the vu.
I don't know why I asked you to do an exercise. Now I have to do that, don't I? Right.
You don't have to, and anybody else doesn't have to do it who's
Why?
watching,
Why is it the growl? By the way,
because that's about the fight response, the aggression, the healthy aggression.
you're restoring that aggression, because I also mentioned that I noticed that in your book, restoring the aggression. So that goes, does it, in a shutdown response, and
That's right.
that should be available to us to
That's
have that
right.
in life, right?
Again, it's because it's the energy and the direction to move ahead in life, to move through life. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I don't have much aggression. Maybe it's been shut down. Yeah.
Well, that's generally what happens. So let's just see if we can just lift it up a little amount, because we have another tool we call titration. You don't do too much too soon. You just slowly add and then add and then add. So let me again demonstrate. Breath come in, and then just rest and just notice sensations, feelings, thoughts, images. I see a little bit more color in your face. I noticed.
Yeah, I didn't get any thoughts, but I got a bit more feeling from the growl bit. Yeah,
Yeah.
quite like that. Yeah,
Okay. What kind of
yeah.
feeling?
Well, just a little bit more kind of dynamic, I suppose. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. So again, that's something that you did, and other people have done
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
in just a few minutes. This just took a few minutes, and that's enough to shift us out so that we're more present. And when that happens, then people want more of that. And that's what the therapy can help provide, and which different kinds of awarenesses can provide.
And do you do body exercises with that as well?
Oh yeah, yeah.
With the
There are many
yeah.
different body exercises.
Okay. And where do
Yeah,
you get
yeah.
them from? Yoga or Tai Chi, or you make them
Well,
up?
more or less made them up, but I was certainly influenced by Qigong and Tai Chi. And I'll give you maybe one more, but then I've got to close shop here. let's say the child was hit a lot by one of the parents or caregivers or older siblings. And so they brace against being hit. And usually if that just happened once or twice, their shoulders go back to where they belong. But if it becomes habitual, becomes chronic, the shoulders start to stay up this way. And then after some time, people start experiencing pain, often chronic pain in their shoulders. So I might ask the person, well, if you feel that pain, can you feel the tension that might be underlying the pain? And most people can do it, maybe with a little extra help, a little extra guidance. And then I said, well, what would that tension want to do if it increased? And they would say, would go like that. I said, okay, but do that 20 times slower and just a little bit at a time. So the shoulders come up this much and then letting them go. And then notice sensations, feelings, thoughts, images. And then again, just a little bit and then letting it go.
That's a good one. I do actually have one very tight shoulder,
Yep.
compared to
So
the
just
other.
slowly, just lifting a
Very
little bit,
slowly. Yeah, that's
little bit
interesting.
slower,
Yeah.
slower.
I could get into that one. Yeah.
Yep. Good.
Ah, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, I only keep it to an hour. I don't want to keep you. What are you working on now? I know you're working on a couple of projects. Do you just want to tell
I
people, give them a
actually
little
have
taster? Yeah.
yep, two projects. One is the main one that I'm working right now, and that's called Trauma and Spirituality, Resilience and the Human Spirit. And I'm about a third of the way through on that. And then also a book which is a sequel to Waking the Tiger, which will be called Embracing the Tiger, Engaging the Instinct to Heal. So it's different aspects, of basically about the same thing, about, my life's work. And I hope to have that out in about a year.
Wow. Both books sound fantastic. I really look forward to everyone. You can get the books on the show notes, and I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. I want to say, Peter, before you give a final word, I always wondered what your entree was at the beggars' banquet. What was your main after the soup? What did you order for the main?
It was
Yeah.
always something different.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, it
What kind of
had
stuff
lots
did
of
they have?
vegetables, and it was usually meat or fish.
Okay.
Uh,
No favorite dish sticks out in mind.
no, no. I mean, it's interesting you asked the question. I
I was a
think it's
chef before, so I'm always
the
interested in
soup
food.
and the
The
French bread.
food got you. Yeah, the soup got you. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
crusty French bread, moist on the inside, crusty on the outside. Any
Exactly.
parting shots? Any words?
They
Just
do.
to,
They can get more
yeah.
information if they go to the Somatic Experiencing, one word, somaticexperiencing.com. Go to the website, and there's a lot of information there, including apparently I haven't seen any, but a lot of the videos that I've done. So
Yeah,
you
there
can.
is. There is. We'll put that in the show notes as well. It'll all be there for you. And go
It
check out the
also
books.
links to the traumahealing.org website, which is the nonprofit part, which is for training in somatic experiencing and for finding therapists in the area where you live. It's now being taught in 44 countries. So there's I can't get my head wrapped around that. For me, it's still like 12 or 15 people. But now it's like about 70 people, 70,000 people. Yeah, still can't even get around it.
Yeah, that's
So anyhow,
incredible.
those are
Yeah. Well, I'm going to quote your quote back to you, William Faulkner. The past is not dead; it is always with us, as you've said elsewhere. On the other hand, as you've also said in the Waking the Tiger, trauma doesn't have to be a life sentence. And I think that was really just that one line was just so liberating for me. So I wanted to say that as an end to our
it's
chat. It's a
too.
two lines. Has he got a second to it?
Trauma is a fact of life, and trauma doesn't have to be a life sentence. I think they go together. I think. I know.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Well, Adam, spending this hour with you and your audience. Yeah, my pleasure, Adam.